Hey, good morning. Join me in John chapter 11. John 11. Human beings, we are endlessly curious things, right? I mean, we're always asking questions. Some of them kind of jettison us forward, right? I mean, like somebody figured out way back a long time ago, maybe the Wright brothers, depending on who you ask. But anyways, they figured out what would happen if we put wings on a bus, right? What would happen? Man, we could travel the whole world really quick. And so they did it. Some questions help us that way. Some questions are just kind of weird, to be honest. I mean, like, is a hot dog a sandwich? Is cereal soup? Yeah, think about that one for a minute. Do chickens sweat? Yeah, somebody asked me that after the 9 a.m. service. They're like, oh, you need to add this one. Like, do chickens sweat? I don't know. I've never really paid that much attention to a live chicken before. My dead chicken's not sweating, unless you count the grease. No, never mind. Yeah, are eyebrows considered facial hair? I mean, so a lot of you ladies, man, that's kind of neat. Anyways, what about why only your fingers and your toes get all wrinkly in the shower? Yeah, I mean, some of you may stay in there long enough to get other things wrinkly, but my fingers and toes, man, that's just messed up. Or what about this one? What if a toddler, your parents in the room, you know what I'm talking about, your toddler doesn't want to take a nap? Does that mean they are resisting arrest? Yeah, those are fun questions. Some are a little harder to answer. Why am I here? Why am I going through this? I mean, we can even get it really a lot deeper and a lot more powerful as why didn't God stop this? Why didn't God do something about the pain I'm feeling? Why doesn't God do something about the pain that I'm feeling? Where is God while I am literally, physically, emotionally, spiritually dying? Well, we've been going through this series called Jesus the Son, right? The Son of God. And we talked about how the Son of God has come into the world to be the representative of the Father. We talked about how he's come to give life, how we have access to him again, how that because God is here, right? God is here. That means we can hope again. That means we can be free from our past. It also means that lasting change is possible. That's how we've been looking at the Son of God. And we've structured the whole thing around these I am statements, where Jesus said, I am the bread of life. And he talked about how he fills our deepest needs and he satisfies what provides the ultimate satisfaction through salvation. We've talked about how he is the light of the world, how he said, I'm the door to the sheep, how he said, I am the good shepherd. And now we're moving to this whole other realm here where Jesus makes another statement, a powerful one that gets to the heart of what God intends to do about our pain and our suffering. Because what we're really asking when we say, where is God in this? Where is God in my hurt? What we're really asking at the core is, can I be okay? Is there purpose in my pain? Can I live again when everything in my life is falling apart? Can there actually be some order from this chaos? Can God actually do something to where I really get on the other side of this thing and I'm able to raise my hand and say, yes, God, thank you for the pain? Well, there was a time in John chapter 11 here where there were a lot of people hurting. There was a man named Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. They were supporters of Jesus' ministry in a little town called Bethany, and just outside of Jerusalem, about 2 miles. And the story goes that they sent to Jesus, Mary and Martha did, and they said, hey, the guy you love, man, your best friend, Lazarus, is sick. You need to come heal him. We're afraid he's going to die. And Jesus got that message and decided intentionally, now this is Jesus, he said, no, I'm not going yet. And he stayed in the place where he was for another couple of days. And at the end of that couple of days, the disciples are getting a little antsy. Everybody's going, Jesus, aren't you going to go heal? Aren't you going to be there? Aren't you going to go and do your Jesus thing? I mean, isn't that what you do? And then Jesus finally on this day stood up and he said, all right, guys, let's go. I'm going to go to Lazarus and wake him up. He's fallen asleep. And they're like, well, wait a minute, Jesus. I mean, he's got some chicken noodle soup. He's asleep. That's healing. We need to leave him alone. And so Jesus tells them plainly, no, Lazarus is dead. Lazarus died. And I am glad in verse 14 for your sakes that I was not there. But I'm going now to wake him up so that you will believe. And Thomas, that guy who's going to doubt Jesus' resurrection in a few weeks or whatever, he is right now going to say, well, you know what? They tried to kill him last time we were in Jerusalem. let's all go so we can die with him. Yeah, so they all get up, they're going to do this thing together. And so they get into Jerusalem, or they get into Bethany rather, and they're headed toward that area. And as they're coming in, Martha, the sister, remember there are two sisters, Martha gets up and she leaves the mourners. They had a lot of mourners in the house. They were mourning people. Okay. Thought I'd break the heaviness there for a second. And all of these people, they're mourning with Mary and Martha. Now, it was not protocol for Martha to get up and leave the house without being summoned by the rabbi, but she did anyway. And she got up and she ran to Jesus as he's coming into town. She heard he was on his way, and she met him there, and she looks at him and she says, if you'd have been here, my brother would not have died. But then she kind of gets some faith back, and she says, but I know that he will be raised in the last day. And so Jesus looks at her, and he says, let's pick up the story here in verse 23. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And she said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world. So Jesus tells her here, I am the resurrection and the life. You want resurrection, but I am the resurrection. You're wondering why I wasn't here to do something, but I am resurrection and life. He's telling her these things. He says, do you believe this? And she doesn't know what to say to this. I mean, this is kind of heavy, deep stuff. So she looks, she says, I have no idea what you just said to me, Jesus, but I do believe you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's what I'm going to hold on to. And so Jesus then begins to move forward. You read in the rest of the text here. He begins to go on, and then he says, okay, go get Mary. So now the rabbi summons Mary. So Mary gets up and comes. Mary says the same thing. She comes up, if you'd have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. You think those ladies talked about this ahead of time? They were having this discussion. They were reading the script, man. They're like, hey, Jesus isn't here. Boy, if he'd have been here, Lazarus would still be with us. And so Jesus then goes on, he gets Mary, he says, where have you put him? Where's the body? Take me to the grave. And so they go out here to the grave, and all the mourners, they said, well, Mary must be going to the tomb now to mourn. So they get up and they all go to the tomb. So Mary's at the tomb, Martha's at the tomb, all the mourners are at the tomb. Jesus comes to the tomb, all the disciples at the tomb, everybody's at the tomb, and everyone is crying. And this is powerful. Hold on to this. In John 11:35, you get the shortest verse in the whole Bible. To prove my spirituality, I'm going to quote it to you. Jesus wept. He stopped right there to cry with them. And then he approaches the tomb. And he says, roll the stone out of the way. And Martha spoke up and she said, well, Jesus, he has been dead for 4 days. But this time, he stinks. And if you're reading the King James, he doesn't just stink, he stinketh. That's a whole new level of stink. He stinketh. And so Jesus looks at her and she goes, all right, roll the stone. And so they roll the stone out of the way. And Jesus cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Now, could you imagine the anticipation here? These people have seen Jesus do the miraculous time and time again. They'd even seen him raise the dead before. You know, the widow's son, and I mean, they've seen him do this before, Jairus' daughter. But here, this guy's been dead 4 days. He stinketh it. And as they're looking in here, they see the darkness of this tomb, and they're waiting. They're just waiting. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And suddenly, you see Lazarus. Now, I don't know if he's hopping. I don't know if he's just kind of doing the penguin waddle, I don't know. But the Bible says he's still all wrapped up in his grave clothes. And he suddenly, from the shadows, you see Lazarus coming out. And Jesus looks at all the people there, and he says, unbind him, let him go. The result of this story is that, as Jesus said, everyone who lives and believes in me will never die, and even though they die, yet shall they live. The result of this thing is the dead live again, and the living never die. That's the result. And what that means is, I mean, obviously, you're like, wait a minute, Joey, 2,000 years of church history has suggested otherwise. People die. Yes, they do. But Jesus is looking at something deeper here. Guys, this is a very, this miracle, this calling back Lazarus from the dead, this resurrection that he gives to Lazarus has literal and metaphorical consequences here. Literally, look at it this way. Jesus physically and literally called a physically literal dead man back to physical literal life, to physically literally show us that he has power over death, physically and literally. This is who he is. He says, look, I have the power over life and death. I am the resurrection. I am the life. But then there's a metaphorical aspect to this too. An implication that we need to look at deeper, because every one of us are going to die one day, and for the believer, we will close our eyes here and open them in his presence, for to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Though we die, yet shall we live. But there's another point to this. Those who live and believe in me will never die. This gets us back to the point. How many of us carry death with us all the time? How many of us look at our lives and we feel the pain and we feel the pressure and we feel the sting of death constantly? Why? Because of our own sin. I mean, think about that for a second. We sin, and the Bible says the wages of sin is death. By our sinful actions, our sinful lifestyles and all this stuff, we surround ourselves with death. In fact, we take out the car keys and we give it to death and we let death drive us. That's what we do. We're letting death control us. And all of our sin, and when we come to the knowledge of, man, my sin's pretty big, it leaves us feeling hopeless and dead. It leaves us feeling beyond the reach of God. What about the death we die from the sins done to us? Other people come at us. Other people hurt us, and their brokenness and their sinfulness leak out on us. And we get destroyed by the sins of other people. Their selfishness, their lust, their whatever it may be, they come at us and they damage us. And all we were doing is minding our own business, trying to make life as best we could, and they come to us, and they broke us. They broke our hearts, they broke our spirits, they attacked our value, they left us for dead. And we believed them. We carry that death. Or maybe it's not what you did or what somebody else did to you. Maybe it's life threw all the lemons at you and there's not enough sugar to make lemonade. The doctor, man, we heard the bad news from the doctor. The car broke down and we just don't have the money to fix it. And all the trials and all the struggles of life, that's not my fault or anybody else's fault, but boy, life is hitting me hard. And it's left me here where I feel like I have no hope, no life, no nothing. That's the metaphorical death we bear. So what do we do about this? Overall, what this passage is teaching us is how Jesus connects with our death and brings his life to it. This is a call to an extreme faith, a level of faith where we don't look at Jesus just as the giver of life, but we see him as life itself. That we begin to understand he is what we need. And as a believer in Jesus, if you are a believer, if you're a follower of Jesus, there is never a time in your life that you do not have life. There's never a time through your circumstances and your pain that you are not alive in him and not that he can make you alive again. That's what we're looking at in Jesus. And I know there are certainly times we all bear certain deaths. We have our worthlessness. We feel dead inside. We're used. We're broken. We feel ended. We feel hopeless. We certainly die in a lot of different ways, but the question we always fall back on is, can Jesus really bring resurrection and life to this? Does he even want to? Can there really be beauty from the ashes? Remember, he is resurrection. He is life. What you see here is a pursuit. When Lazarus died, Jesus got up and said, guys, we got to get there. And he comes. In our death, he pursues us. He brings mercy. He brings life. He intends to give life and restore. Listen, guys, put it this way. Jesus came to chew bubble gum and give life, and he is all out of bubble gum. He is here to breathe life back into our death. Why? Because he is resurrection and life. So how does Jesus do that? I mean, how do we, as get out of our circle of death and walk and live in his life now? How do we do that? So this morning, we're going to key back in. I gave you the overview, right? We saw the whole panorama. And now we're going to get back into, we're going to focus right here on verses 20 through 27. That's what we're going to focus on right now. And we're going to see this interchange between Martha and Jesus, and we're going to look at their conversation, and then we're going to see how Jesus begins to bring resurrection and life into our lives from our chaos. How's he going to do that? And then we'll see at the end how to restructure our life to tap into that. Okay, that's how we're going to do this today. Now, as we go through this, I want you thinking in terms of what your sin has cost you, what other people's sins have brought to you, and what life itself is doing. And we're going to see how Jesus brings life to all of that. Okay, so back in the text here. Number one, he brings life again, right, by refocusing our faith. Refocusing our faith, that's where he starts. Okay, let's look at the text. We'll see in verse 20, so Martha heard that Jesus was coming. She went and met him, but Mary remained seated at the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd have been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give to you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Do we believe that? I mean, do we believe that Jesus can heal? Here's why Jesus has to start here, right? I mean, it seems logical. Now, keep in mind, he's on his way to raise this guy from the dead. Remember that? He's on his way. That's his plan. It's on his to-do list. Objective number one, get him alive, right? But Jesus does not sidestep Martha in her pain. He does not ignore her. He stops along the way to do something powerful in her life, and that is to reorient her faith back onto him. Here's why this is so necessary. How many of you have ever been waylaid by life? I mean, you're doing like Mike Tyson always said, right? The great theologian Mike Tyson. Everybody's got a plan till you get punched in the face, right? Then all bets are off. I mean, think about it. When you became aware of what your sinfulness was actually doing, when you looked in the mirror and you didn't recognize the face looking back at you, and you said, how did I get here? Suddenly everything shifts. When someone hurt you, everything shifted in your life. When life came at you and you're going, but Jesus, I was faithful to you. I was in church. I was doing all this. I was showing up for the card stuff, man. That was, And suddenly we're looking around, and this event that hit us it's shattering our faith. It's causing us to question everything. You know, that loved one that passed, that thing that happened. How we look at our own brokenness, all these things, and it makes us look around. And then the enemy comes with the accusation, yeah, why would God do that? And so we begin to question, is God really good? Because this happened to me, right? Why did this happen to me? And then from there, the question bleeds into a brand new one, is God even real? Because a good God wouldn't have let this happen. A good God would have protected me. A good God would have done this. And then here comes somebody like me who comes up to you and says, yeah, you know, God's got a purpose. And you know what? When you're not willing to look at Jesus, the last thing you want to hear is God's got a purpose. That's the last thing. Because what we begin to do is we're saying, I don't even know if he's good. I don't know if he's real. And you're bringing Jesus to me. I don't even want to hear it. That's where we find Martha. Martha goes to Jesus and she says, Lord, if you'd have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Jesus is coming to give life. Martha's coming to argue. Martha's coming to accuse. Jesus, where were you? That's what Martha's doing here. And here's Jesus' answer. Notice Jesus does not go, Martha, what is wrong with you? You know I can raise the... He doesn't do that, does he? What does he do? He simply looks at her and he says, your brother's going to live again. I've got this, Martha. And then she says, I know, you're going to raise him at the last day. See, she wanted to have a theological discussion. Jesus just wanted to get personal. He wanted to come in here and let her know, I am here. And then she says, at that resurrection the last day, Jesus goes, no, Martha, I am the resurrection. I am the life. In other words, Martha, in your chaos right here, I get it. You are hurting and I'm here with you. But that's just it. I am here. When you went prodigal and you felt God wasn't there, when the pain came to you and you asked, where was God? When life fell apart and you're looking at this going, Jesus, where have you been? I want you to hear this response. Jesus said, I am here. Even if you feel he wasn't there, he is here. And he is calling to you now. He has to refocus us on himself. He has to get us focused on himself. Why? Because he must begin with faith. Faith is the awareness of God's presence and confidence in his purpose. Listen, we think we need healing immediately. We don't. We need Jesus immediately. That's why he's reorienting us back to him. Before we need healing, above we need comfort, we need Jesus, because there is no healing outside of him. You can use methods to cope, but you can't heal without him. You can never be at peace without the Prince of Peace. You can never be in the green pastures without the shepherd. And in those moments where we're looking around going, God, what happened? What happened? And we're starting to look at the storm and we're starting to look at the hardships. Now's the time to stop and breathe and reorient yourself back to the Savior. It's where we've got to start. Why? Because first, Jesus begins by refocusing our faith, and this is why, secondly, a refocused faith opens us up to his purpose. A refocused faith opens us to his purpose. Remember how I told you a second ago, the last thing you want to hear is God's got a purpose when you can't see Jesus? Well, when Jesus begins to get in your field of view again, and you can now see Jesus, now you're open to understanding what that purpose is. Now you're open to going, okay, Jesus, what are we doing here? Because when we're not focused on Jesus, we put death in the driver's seat. Everything is surrounded by death. Notice Martha again. What did Martha do? I know he'll rise again at the resurrection at the last day. What she's saying, let me decode this for you. Jesus, if you'd have been here, you could have acted. You could have done something. You had power in the past, Jesus. Your brother's going to rise again. Oh, yeah, I know you got power in the future. He'll rise the last day, but right now you seem pretty powerless. Church, have we forgotten that he is resurrection and life? He did not say, I was the resurrection and life. He did not say, I will be the resurrection and the life. He said, I am the resurrection and the life. That is present tense. That is right here, right now. But what we do is we define ourselves. All Martha could see is her brother is dead. She was defining Jesus' words by the fact that her brother was dead. How often do we define our lives by the fact that we feel dead? How often do we let death get in the driver's seat? And I want to tell you, death drives like a drunk monkey. Death will mess you up when we let death define us. But we do. The biggest lie Satan feeds us in regard to this is that there is no reason in your suffering. That there is no reason for this. There is no purpose in what God has allowed in your life. That there is nothing here. You know, go back to this idea for a second of why didn't God? That's a good question, actually. But most of us mean it in a negative way. What if we put a spin on it, and instead of going, why didn't God? What if we ask, why didn't God? Here's what I mean. Go back to verse 14 for a second. In verse 14, still in John 11, then Jesus told them plainly, this is before they went, Lazarus has died. And listen to this part. For your sake, I'm glad I was not there. What? For your sake, I'm glad I was not there? Jesus is saying, I deliberately let this dude die for your sake. Why? So that you will believe. So that you'll believe. You mean God actually does have a purpose for the things that happen to us? Listen, if God didn't, then we need to be asking, why didn't he? He's the good shepherd. He leads. We've talked about that. Everywhere he leads, no matter what's going on, you can look around and go, there's me some grass to eat. There's something I can get onto. Here's something I can latch into and grow. You see, remember, the invitation is back into himself. We've talked about this. The invitation is back into himself. Everything that God is doing in our lives is about refocusing us back on him. But Satan will come again and say, see, look at this pain. God has abandoned you. No. Listen, our pain is an invitation to explore God's goodness. That's what it is. It's an invitation to experience more of him. Listen, the reason we died back in the Garden of Eden, the reason death came into the world, the reason our sinfulness is because we separated ourselves from the knowledge of God. We separated ourselves from following God. We unplugged ourselves from life. Now we got to plug back in. And that is going to involve sometimes a few power surges to make it seem like the lights are out. Why? Because God does bring purpose to your pain. He does. Here's how. He looks into our lives. The pain we endure is a chance to look at Him and know Him through experience, not just words on a page. Remember, Martha wanted to keep this conversation theological. Jesus is going deeper. Experiencing truth, not just hearing it. Do you know, without our pain, we could never experience God as healer? We'd know He is, but we would not experience it. Without knowing Him as the one who comforts, how could we ever provide comfort to somebody else? How could we ever experience and know His comfort? You know, some of my favorite memories when I was a kid, this is going to sound really weird, but some of my favorite memories growing up was when I was sick. You're like, Joey, you are a sick person. I know, I just said that. I was sick. But you know why? Because I remember that's like when my mom would hug me, you know? She hugged me at other times, but not like when I was sick. That's when that love of the mom came in. I didn't have a dad, you know, until I was like 9. Sometimes I'd fake sick, you know, because that got me out of school, let me watch Price is Right, you know, stuff like that. But that level of comfort I never would have gotten. Guys, do you realize that's how intimately Jesus wants to know you? It's a chance to experience Him. It's not enough just to serve Him. We get to know Him. There would be entire avenues of God's character we would never know apart from our pain. And to know Him and experience that is worth all the pain. That's where we stand up and we say, Jesus, bring the rain. That's where the scripture says in the book of Hebrews that it was for the joy set before Him that He endured the cross, despising the shame. He went to the cross. Why? Because He knew that He'd be with us in eternity and He'd be able to save us and welcome us in. That was the joy. You say, well, that makes God pretty sick. I mean, God is like cruel here. No. You parents that have ever done this before, you got to take your kid to the doctor and they have to give your kid a shot and your kid is wearing boots. So you got like 93 doctors holding your kid down so they can give him one little shot. One little shot. Meanwhile, your kid is kicking, screaming, begging you, Daddy, help me. Don't let him do this. Daddy, help me. Speaking from experience, okay? And in that moment, you know what you want to do? You want to help. You want to jump in and go, no. So I did the dad thing. I'm like, you get one shot at this. And they're like, it is one shot. But you have to let it unfold. Why? For the healing to come. For the knowledge to come. In our chance for the life to be breathed back in. And it just like that, not for 1 second. I mean, you sitting over here and I'm like, something in my eye as I'm watching this thing go down. And notice again what Jesus does in verse 35. Jesus wept. No, guys, let me throw this to you this way. If I were Jesus, if I were the guy going to raise somebody from the dead, here's what I would do. I'd be walking up, everybody's crying. I'd be like, yeah, y'all just wait 1 more minute. I'm going to get this guy back up. You're all going to go, wow, that's awesome. And I'm going to go do this. That was what I would do. One of the 3,086 and a half reasons it's good that I'm not God. But Jesus stopped. Even though in about 5 minutes or whatever, he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead and all's going to be okay, he still stopped and cried with his people. Not for 1 second does God separate himself from our pain. Even the pain he is allowing for our growth. Why? The other side. The purpose is increased faith. I promise you this. I promise you this. If you endure actual pain and you look to Jesus and you refocus on him, he will use that pain to develop a faith in you that cannot be shaken. He will also develop in you a love for other people that cannot be squished, can't be quelled. because you no longer look at people and judge. You look at people and you hurt for them too. You see, he's developing us. There is purpose in the pain. And when we refocus on him, then we're open to understanding the purpose in the pain. And it gets even better. When we're open to the purpose of pain, thirdly, embracing that purpose restores our hope. Embracing that purpose restores our hope. You see what he does? Jesus begins by refocusing our faith. Then from there, he can share his purpose. And from that purpose, he gives hope to get us along. Look at Martha's response again. He says, do you believe this? And she's like, yeah, I don't know what you just said, Jesus, but I know this. I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world. And from there, Jesus reorients, look at me. Jesus says, get death out of the driver's seat. Let me show you what I'm doing. Now, let's bring something out of this pain. Let's do something here. We look at ourselves a lot of times and we feel we have nothing to offer because we are broken. We feel nothing, like we can't do anything because of our past, whether that's a good past or a bad past or a hurt past or whatever. We feel like we can't. Jesus begs to differ. Because look what he did. He ignores the stench. He ignores everything going on around. And what does he do? He goes right to the thing and he says, hey, come out. You see, this is where the hope comes in. Your resurrection, your life that he will breathe back into you from your pain, from your chaos, from your circumstances, from your sin, the life he breathes back in, he's going to use for what? His glory and your good. That's what's going to happen. He goes and he raises Lazarus. And you know how many people the Bible says believed because of Lazarus? All those people around, Lazarus comes hopping out of the tomb and they're like, you know what? I think this guy might be the Son of God. Even later in chapter 12, you go on and read, the Pharisees wanted to kill Lazarus too because people were believing on Jesus because of Lazarus. Do you realize the impact God can have on others because of what he's doing in you? The hope you can give. As you begin to see that freely, as you begin to understand what he's doing in your life and how he moves you forward, guys, it restores hope because it begins to let us look at our pain in a whole new way. That's why Paul would tell the church at Corinth, I want you to comfort others with the same comfort God has given to you. You will be amazed when you begin to see how much the pain you've gone through connects with your calling from God. How much the things we've done, God takes and he starts using. How many times you're going to have somebody come to you. I can't tell you how many times I counsel with somebody. And I always have to show them. I mean, you can, whatever. But I'm always having to go, hey, look, that's coming up in my sermon this week. I've already got the notes. I can show you. I'm not preaching about our counseling session. Because that's how God works. He's connected. He's using us. And that's what he's doing. It often shapes our calling. What he's showing us here is it's not the end. He's going to bring life from it, and he's going to continue to use it. On the flip side of this, sometimes he heals you for the sake of those around you, because bitterness will latch on to somebody at any moment, even the people that didn't hurt you. What I mean by that is a lot of times if we don't let Jesus heal us, we're leaking pain everywhere we go, and you will hurt people who never hurt you. So Jesus is protecting other people by healing you too. But how can he use you? How can he use your pain? How can he do this? Because when we begin to see that purpose, it begins to let us let go of the bitterness. That's what it begins to do. I love how Joseph in the book of Genesis chapter 50, go read this later. Joseph had been, he was beat up by his brothers, dumped in the well, which was kind of their toilet too. There he goes. They dug him out later, sold him into slavery. Those people sold him into a different branch of slavery. Then he was over here and he got put into the Potiphar's house. He was accused of a crime he did not commit, sent to a prison, which is a dungeon, for a few years, made a deal, interpreted some dreams, made a deal with a guy. Now, when you're back before Pharaoh, mention me. Dude did mention him 2 years later. And so forth and so on. Go read the story. But eventually, Joseph becomes the second in command of all of Egypt. And then he comes face to face with those brothers who beat him up and did all that stuff. And you know what he does? Long story short, kind of cutting to the end here. in Genesis 50, verse 20, he's able to come to the point because he saw God's purpose in it. He kept his faith on God. He rode this thing out, looked for purpose, never lost his hope in God. He was able to look at these brothers and tell them, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Therefore, I forgive you. Wow, that's the power. You have a purpose that your past cannot discredit. What Jesus has saved you from and is saving you from is now part of your testimony, and it only testifies to His greatness, His love, His redemption, His purpose. Overrule and rewrite your story. That's how good He is. Why? Because He is the resurrection and the life. Now, this healing process we go through in Jesus, we've got to understand what healing actually is. Healing is not getting back to what it was before. Else, why the trial? Healing is not just let me get my life back to where, that's not healing. Our focus is fruit bearing. How is Jesus going to use this? And that's where we get that life again, through what He's doing. The purpose is not for you to learn to hate. It's not for you to learn how to build walls and protect yourself. It's not for you to try to do all these other things or question your value or question your worth. The result, what God is after, is fruit in your life, to know Him and reflect Him. So what do we do when life comes at us? How do we tap into that resurrection in the life if Jesus does want us to refocus faith, find purpose, and regain hope? How do we do that? I'll give you 4 ways real quick. This is what you do when you feel this way and you need to connect with Jesus. Number 1, you worship. Worship. That has a way of putting us right back to where Jesus is. When you sin, turn back and worship quickly. When someone sins against you, gather and look at him and worship. I love how David, go and read the Psalms. Just read the Psalms, especially the first 41 Psalms, book 1 of the Psalms. You go and read, and it's like David's like, people are trying to kill me. Maybe I should write a song about it. So he did. And these people are after him. They're trying to kill him, murder him, do all these things to him. You know what he does? He starts the psalm by worshiping God for who He is. That's how he starts. Then he's like, oh, and by the way, they're trying to kill me, but can you help? But he begins with worship because that puts God in His place and puts death in its place. Worship Him. Secondly, focus on Him. Focus on Jesus. That's what He leads Martha to do right here. Focus back on Jesus, specifically the cross. Specifically the cross. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. You cannot have resurrection without a death. Right? And so what He does is He looks again and He says, look at me again. The sins that we think have destroyed us, Jesus died and took those away from us. The sins of others against us, boy, they really sinned against Jesus when they nailed Him to the cross, and He bore their sins as well to free them and us. So, well, I'm innocent. This is just life. Jesus was innocent. He died. He was buried. He said, in the world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer, for I've overcome the world. You see, as we begin to focus and really dig into the cross, we see that Jesus has taken everything that was against us, everything that's hurted us. He has hurted. Yeah, I stand by that. Hurteth. He gets us to that point where we're able to look again and see that He has already won the battle. Say, Joe, you don't know what they did to me. He won the battle over it. You don't know what I've done. He won the battle over it. Boy, the world is, He won the battle over it. Doesn't mean you're not going to hurt. But that's where we got to come to point 3, and that is trust. Trust. Worship, focus on Jesus, trust. That's the hard part. This is where Martha comes in, and she didn't understand this whole resurrection and life thing, but she had to come to this point where she's like, Jesus, I got no clue what you just said to me, but I believe that you are the Christ. I believe that's you. This is where it gets hard, because this is where we put the money where the mouth is. Do we trust Him even if the pain does not immediately go away? Do we trust Him even if we must walk through the valley of the shadow of death? Do we trust Him even when that... Guys, I cannot tell you How many times in my own pain, I've had to just gas up the car and drive around, and gas ain't cheap, y'all. But you drive around, and you worship, you focus, you ugly cry until you get to the point where you can say, but I trust you. I trust you with this. But I can promise you it's worth it. Because in that moment, you will remember He loves you. And you'll begin to see that the reason you're going through a unique pain that maybe somebody else isn't, but you begin to understand you're going through a unique pain because God has a unique print on your life. And He's growing you to do something unique. We need it, guys. And lastly, you chase God. Chase that purpose. Chase that, what He's doing. Look around the thing. Go, okay, God, I'm back on you. I'm surrendered to you. What can I learn from this? Where's my green grass? What can I feed on here? How are you going to grow me? And it may involve us getting up and going somewhere else. It may. Because here's the thing. Most of the time we're missing, I'm going over a little bit here, guys, but I have to say this. I'm sorry. Deal with it. Sometimes we don't get to that new life in Jesus because we're still letting the old life define us. We're still letting it drive. We're still screening everything through our death and our pain. The wise theologian Winnie the Pooh said, I always get to where I'm going by walking away from where I have been. I always get to where I'm going by walking away from where I've been. You say, well, I can't get out of this right now. Maybe you can't, but you can look at Him. You can see what's around you where He's provided you some green pasture, and you look at Him as the resurrection and the life. You say, well, Joey, how do I know that really works? How do I know that resurrection and life thing really is going to happen for me? Let me tell you a story about the end. Martha brought up the end. Jesus didn't deny the end, so let me tell you about the end. In the book of Revelation, John, he's seeing the vision here, and what he does, he looks, and the angel lifts up the title deed of creation, the restoration of all things. How all of the brokenness, all of the evil, all of the death will be undone and liberated. And boy, we're going to be free again. And nobody could open it. Everybody tried, and there was not found anybody in heaven or earth or anywhere who could open it yet. And so John started to weep because no one was found worthy to open the book, which meant everybody was going to be locked in death and eternal punishment. But then, one of the elders puts his hand on John and says, hey, dude, don't cry. He says, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has prevailed, and He can open the seals. He can restore all things. He can bring it all back. And so John looks up expecting to see a lion, but you know what he saw? He saw a lamb as it had been slain. But this lamb was standing, resurrected, risen. And He came over, and He got the seal. He got the scroll, and He started plucking seals, and the balance of power of good and evil began to shift. And you read about that in Revelation. Short story, Jesus wins. And so do you, if you will come to the resurrection and the life. Let me pray for you. Jesus, I thank You so much for the opportunity You've given us together to gather together, to be with You here. And Lord, we're all bringing hurts today, whether we did it to ourselves, whether other people did it, whether life did it. But Jesus, You are the resurrection. There is purpose in what we endure. Teach us to focus on You, to hope in You, and we will breathe that life in us constantly as we endure it, because You've given us strength. You've overcome. And Jesus, I thank You that You've risen from the dead. You're the one who died and is alive again. And Lord, for us today, I pray that You take that pain. I pray that You take that hopelessness away from us. I pray that You remove that death and restore Your life and Your hope and Your peace so that everybody around us, they see our life caving, but Lord, they also see us healing. They see us hopeful. And they're able to ask the question, what in the world happened to you so that you are so hopeful? Let us be ready to give a reason. Father, for those in the place today that do not know Jesus, call them. For those of us who are hurting over measures of death in our life, heal us. And for those of us who have lost our way and lost our hope, restore us. Because you are the resurrection and the life.